The courtroom smells like old wood and broken promises. I'm sitting in the back row, watching my family's lawyer lean into his performance. His name is Marcus Webb, and he's everything you'd expect from a man who charges $800 an hour to destroy someone's life with a smile. Your Honor. Webb says, his voice carrying that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been wrong about anything. The evidence is overwhelming. Ms. Callahan systematically isolated her elderly parents, manipulated their finances, and exploited her position in the defense industry to intimidate them into compliance. My mother nods from the front row. My father's hands are folded in his lap, and he won't look at me. Behind them, my brother Brad sits with his wife Eva, both of them wearing the kind of satisfied expressions you see on people who've just watched their enemy fall into a pit they spent years digging. Webb continues, "We're seeking full restitution of the family trust, immediate transfer of the Richmond property, and punitive damages for the emotional distress inflicted upon this family. Additionally, we believe Ms. Callahan should be held financially responsible for the legal fees incurred in this matter." He pauses, letting that sink in. The judge, a tired-looking man named Harrison, makes notes on his pad. Furthermore, Webb adds, "We're requesting that the court consider criminal referral for fraud and elder abuse." Eva whispers something to Brad. He smiles. I remain quiet in my seat. The folder in my lap feels heavier than it should, considering it's just paper. But some pieces of paper can level mountains. "Ms. Callahan," Judge Harrison says, "do you have representation?" I stand. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." Webb's eyebrows lift slightly. A woman representing herself against a family law heavyweight. This should be entertaining. "Very well," the judge says. "Do you wish to respond to the allegations?" "Not at this time, Your Honor." More whispers from the gallery. My parents exchange glances. Brad leans forward, probably wondering if I finally cracked completely. "I do, however, have a document I'd like to submit for the court's review." I walk to the front, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Judge Harrison extends his hand, and I place the sealed folder on his bench. He opens it, scans the first page. His expression doesn't change, but something shifts in his posture. He flips to the second page, then the third. The fourth page makes him stop breathing for a moment. "Bailiff," he says quietly, "please secure the courtroom doors." The bailiff moves without question. The heavy wooden doors close with a sound like a coffin lid. Webb's confidence falters. "Your Honor, what's the meaning of—" "Call the U.S. Marshals," Judge Harrison interrupts. "Tell them we need a federal response team here immediately." The temperature in the room drops 10 degrees. My mother's face has gone the color of old paper. My father's hands are trembling now. Brad starts to stand, but Eva grabs his arm. "Your Honor," Webb tries again. "I don't understand what Mr. Webb," the judge says, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's just seen something that changes everything. "I suggest you advise your clients to remain seated and keep their hands visible." Brad's face has gone from satisfied to confused to something approaching panic. Eva's mouth is moving, but no sound comes out. Judge Harrison looks at me. "Ms. Callahan, I need to ask you directly. Are you currently, or have you ever been an employee of the United States government?" "Former employee, Your Honor, Department of Defense, Systems Analyst for Veteran Database Security." "And the document you've submitted, evidence of identity theft, fraud, and possible compromise of classified veteran records, Your Honor, all tied to shell companies operated by the plaintiffs." The silence that follows is the kind that comes before thunder. My brother Brad finally finds his voice. "That's impossible. Erin's lying. Mr. Coleman." The judge says, "I strongly advise you to remain quiet." Through the tall windows, I can see black SUVs pulling up to the courthouse, men in suits stepping out, radio chatter echoing in the hallway. My name is Erin Callahan. I'm 42 years old. I'm the youngest daughter in a family that spent my entire life telling me I was fragile, foolish, expendable. The afterthought. The pretty one who never amounted to anything. For most of my life, I believed them. But here's what they never understood about being underestimated when people think you're not paying attention. They stop being careful about what they do in front of you. And when you've spent 15 years securing databases that protect the most vulnerable people in our country, you learn to recognize patterns. You learn to follow digital breadcrumbs. You learn that the most dangerous criminals are often the ones who smile at you across the dinner table. The marshals are in the hallway now. I can hear their boots on the marble floor. Webb is shuffling papers, trying to look like he has any idea what's happening. My parents are whispering urgently to each other. Brad keeps looking at the door like he's calculating distances. But I'm not looking at any of them anymore. I'm looking at Judge Harrison, who's reading the last page of my folder. The page that shows exactly how my family turned my life's work, protecting veterans' identities, into a weapon against the very people I swore to serve. The courtroom doors open. The marshals step inside, and for the first time in my life, I'm not the one who's about to disappear. Maybe you're wondering how someone ends up in a federal courthouse, watching their own family get detained by U.S. Marshals. Let me tell you who I really am. Not the version they sold to that courtroom, but the truth they never bothered to learn. My name is Erin Callahan. I'm 42 years old. For 15 years, I was a senior systems analyst for Meridian Defense Solutions, a federal contractor that handles secure defense infrastructure. That's the fancy way of saying I protected databases full of people who trusted our government to keep them safe. Veterans' medical records, disability claims, housing applications. The kind of information that in the wrong hands could destroy someone's life completely. I was good at that job. Better than good. I could spot a data breach from 3 states away, track digital footprints through servers most people didn't know existed, and build security protocols that kept predators away from the most vulnerable people in our system. But in my family, I was the afterthought. The pretty one who never lived up to anything. Growing up, family dinners were like performance reviews, where I always failed. Brad would talk about his latest business venture, always something impressive, always making money. Eva would share updates about her therapy practice, helping troubled families find their way. My parents would beam with pride, asking follow-up questions, wanting to understand every detail. Then they'd turn to me. "How's work, honey?" My mother would ask the same tone she'd used to ask about the weather. "Fine," I'd say. Because how do you explain database architecture to people who think technology is something that happens to them, not something they can control? "Still doing that computer stuff," my father would add, already reaching for his phone. Computer stuff. Like I was fixing printers at a strip mall instead of safeguarding the identities of people who'd bled for this country. They had names for me. Quiet Erin. Antisocial Erin. Erin who never calls enough, never visits enough, never shares enough. Erin who keeps to herself too much and doesn't know how to connect with people. The truth was simpler. I was good with data, not with words. Numbers made sense. Patterns were predictable. Code didn't lie to you about who you were or what you were worth. So I let them define me. The family introductions became a script I memorized. "This is our daughter, Erin. She's single, works with computers, very quiet. Not like Brad, he's the social one." At holidays, I'd sit at the kids' table even after I turned 30, not because there wasn't room with the adults, but because they'd already decided I didn't have anything adult to contribute. When I bought my house, they asked who helped me with the paperwork. When I got promoted, they asked if I was sure I was qualified. When I mentioned traveling for work conferences, they wondered aloud if I was getting in over my head. Every conversation was a small erasure. Every family gathering a reminder that I was the daughter who never quite measured up to whatever they thought I should be. But here's what they never understood about people who work in silence. We're always listening, always watching, always remembering. And when you spend your career tracking down people who steal identities, you recognize the signs when someone starts stealing yours. The marshals are walking Brad and Eva out of the courtroom now. My parents are still sitting in their seats staring at nothing. The lawyer is packing his briefcase like his hands are moving through water. If you're still listening to this, maybe you know what it feels like to be silenced. Maybe you've sat at your own version of the kids' table, waiting for someone to notice you're worth hearing. Maybe you've been erased too. Before everything unraveled, my life was small and predictable. I liked it that way. My house in Midlothian, a 15-minute drive from downtown Richmond, sat on a quiet street where neighbors waved but didn't ask personal questions. 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for my home office. A kitchen I actually used. A back porch where I'd sit with coffee and watch the sunrise before driving to work. At Meridian Defense Solutions, I had a corner cubicle with 2 monitors and a view of the parking lot. My coworkers knew I was reliable, thorough, and wouldn't bother them with small talk. Perfect for someone whose job was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The VA database systems were my specialty. Every morning, I'd log in and see thousands of records veterans applying for disability benefits, housing assistance, medical coverage. Each file represented someone who'd served someone who'd trusted the system to catch them when they fell. My job was making sure predators couldn't catch them first. Identity theft hits veterans harder than most people realize. They're vulnerable in ways that make them perfect targets. Fixed incomes, medical challenges, trust in official-looking paperwork. Criminals know this. They harvest veteran data like farmers, harvesting crops systematic and efficient. I built walls around those records, digital fortresses, authentication protocols that could tell the difference between a legitimate claim and a scammer in Detroit pretending to be a disabled Marine from Norfolk. It was detailed work, methodical. The kind of thing that requires patience and pattern recognition. The kind of thing my family found impossibly boring. Christmas dinner, 2019. I'm 37, sitting between my teenage niece and my uncle's new girlfriend, while the adults discuss Brad's latest venture. Tell them about the veteran outreach program, Eva says, practically glowing with pride. Brad leans back in his chair, the satisfied pose of a man who's about to be celebrated. We're partnering with local VA offices to provide trauma counseling. Eva's developed this amazing therapy model that helps veterans process their experiences in group settings. My father sets down his fork. That's incredible, son. How many veterans are you helping? We're up to about 300 active clients, Brad says. The VA is so impressed they're considering expanding our contract statewide. Murmurs of approval around the table. My mother reaches over to squeeze Eva's hand. You two are doing such important work. Then, as if suddenly remembering I exist, my father turns to me. Erin, don't you work with veteran stuff too? I do data security for VA systems, I say. Blank stares. Like computer security, my mother asks. I protect veteran records from identity theft and fraud. Brad laughs, not unkindly, but not kindly either. That's so different from what we do. We're actually working with the veterans themselves, helping them heal. Not just background tech stuff. Background tech stuff. My uncle's girlfriend nods enthusiastically. Oh, that's so much more meaningful than computers. You're really making a difference in people's lives. I want to tell them about Maria Santos, the Army veteran whose identity was stolen 3 times before I built the protocols that finally protected her. About James Miller, the Marine who lost his legs in Afghanistan and nearly lost his disability benefits to a criminal in Tampa who'd been filing fake claims in his name. I want to explain that every security wall I build, every authentication system I design, every fraud pattern I identify means another veteran gets to keep their benefits, their medical care, their housing assistance. But I don't say any of that. Instead, I nod and take another bite of turkey while the conversation moves on to Brad's plans for expanding his practice. This was the pattern. At every family gathering, every holiday, every casual phone call, I was the side character in someone else's story. The quiet sister who did something vaguely technical that nobody quite understood or cared to learn about. They'd celebrate Brad's successes, his business deals, his community involvement, his growing reputation as a veteran advocate. They'd praise Eva's compassion, her dedication to helping people heal from trauma. And I'd sit there protecting the very people they claimed to serve, invisible in plain sight. After dinner, I'd drive home to my quiet house, pour a glass of wine, and review security logs on my laptop, finding patterns in the data that told stories about people trying to hurt other people, building defenses that would hold until morning. It was solitary work. Necessary work. The kind of work that keeps democracy functioning even if nobody at the family dinner table understood why. I told myself it was enough. That recognition didn't matter. That quiet service was its own reward. But late at night when the security logs were clean and the house was silent, I'd sometimes wonder what it would feel like to be seen. Really seen. Not as background tech stuff, but as someone who mattered. I should have been more careful about what I wished for. The mortgage statement arrived on a Tuesday in March, mixed in with my electric bill and a catalog I'd never ordered. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The return address showed First National Bank of Richmond, and the envelope was addressed to me, but The property listed was 1247 Maple Grove Lane, my childhood home, my parents' house. I opened it carefully the way you handle something that might explode. Thank you for your recent mortgage payment of $247.50, the statement read. Your current balance is $127,332.80. Please note recent changes to your account require updated documentation. Contact our office to discuss title modifications. I read it 3 times. Then I called the bank. Ms. Callahan, the representative said, I show you were recently removed from the mortgage and title due to a family trust restructuring. The new primary account holders are Bradley Coleman and Eva Coleman. Brad and Eva, my brother and his wife, now controlled my parents' house. A house that had been in our family for 37 years. A house where I'd grown up, where I'd spent countless weekends, helping my father with yard work, where I'd assumed I'd always be welcome. When did this change occur? I asked. Let me check. The paperwork was filed February 15th. You should have received notification. I hadn't received anything. But more importantly, I'd never signed anything. Could you send me copies of the documentation? I can mail them to your address on file. The envelope arrived 4 days later. Inside were 23 pages of legal documents, all bearing official seals and notarized signatures, trust revisions, property transfers, financial power of attorney agreements. My signature appeared on 12 of them. I spread the papers across my kitchen table under the bright overhead light, studying each one like evidence at a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize they were. The signatures looked right at first glance, the same flowing cursive I'd been signing my name with for 25 years, but something felt off. The pressure was wrong. The angle of certain letters, the way the N in Callahan curved slightly upward instead of straight across. Someone had practiced my signature. Someone who knew my handwriting well enough to forge it convincingly, but not perfectly. I pulled out a magnifying glass I used for reading component serial numbers at work. Under magnification, the forgeries became obvious. The ink was different, slightly more blue than the black I always used. The paper had been pressed harder in some places, lighter in others, the telltale sign of someone copying rather than writing naturally. But it was the smudge on page 7 that made my blood run cold. Just below my forged signature, a tiny blue ink smudge. The kind you get when you're left-handed and your hand drags across wet ink. The kind of smudge I'd seen 1,000 times growing up on Brad's homework, on birthday cards. He'd signed on the checks he'd write when he borrowed money from our parents. Brad had always been left-handed. He'd always been careless with ink. And in high school, he'd been caught forging permission slips, a skill that apparently improved with age. I sat at my kitchen table until sunset, reading every document, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline in my head. According to the paperwork, I'd signed away my inheritance rights, agreed to remove my name from the family trust, and transferred my portion of the property to Brad and Eva. All of this supposedly happened while I was in Arlington, Virginia, attending a 3-day cybersecurity conference. I had hotel receipts, presentation schedules, and credit card statements, proving I was 120 miles away when I allegedly walked into a notary's office in Richmond. But the documents were filed. The transfers were complete. Legally, I no longer existed in my own family's financial structure. I didn't call Brad that night. I didn't confront my parents. I didn't drive over to demand explanations. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do. I observed. I documented. I began building a file. Because this wasn't just about money or property. This was about erasure. The systematic removal of my identity from my own family's story. And if Brad was willing to forge my signature to steal my inheritance, what else was he willing to do? The next morning, I logged into my work computer and ran a routine background check on Coleman Family Services' Brad and Eva's therapy practice. Nothing unusual appeared at first. Licensed therapists, good reviews, contracts with local VA offices. But I knew how to look deeper, how to trace digital footprints, how to follow money trails through databases most people didn't know existed. What I found made me understand that the forged signatures were just the beginning. Late that night, I sat in my quiet house staring at the documents spread across my table. The mortgage statement, the trust revisions, the forged signatures with their telltale ink smudges. For 37 years, I'd been the quiet daughter, the one who didn't make waves, the one who let other people define her worth. But something had shifted, something deep and permanent. a small flame that started in my chest and spread outward, burning away the version of myself that had been willing to disappear. I wasn't going to be erased anymore. I was going to find out exactly what my family had been doing in my name, and then I was going to stop them. The lawsuit arrived 6 weeks after I discovered the forged signatures, hand-delivered by a process server who knocked on my door at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Erin Callahan. Yes, you've been served. The envelope was thick, official, and carried the weight of everything I'd feared was coming. Inside were 47 pages of legal accusations that painted me as a predator who'd systematically destroyed my own family. Coleman v. Callahan, civil action for financial elder abuse, fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brad was suing me. His petition claimed I'd used my position at Meridian Defense Solutions to intimidate my aging parents into signing over financial control, that I'd exploited my technical expertise to isolate them from their assets, that I'd manipulated their declining mental capacity to steal their life savings. According to the lawsuit, I was a calculating sociopath who'd spent years positioning myself to defraud my own family. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. Page 12 contained a statement from my parents. We trusted our daughter Erin to help us manage our finances as we aged. Instead, she used her knowledge of computers and government databases to confuse and frighten us into signing documents we didn't understand. We are devastated by this betrayal. I read that paragraph 17 times, looking for some trace of the parents who'd raised me, the people who'd taught me to tie my shoes and helped me with algebra homework, the ones who'd attended my college graduation and hugged me when I got my first job. But all I found were strangers' signatures on a legal document designed to destroy me. The lawsuit demanded full restitution of the family trust, $347,000, transfer of the Richmond property, punitive damages for emotional distress, attorney fees, and a recommendation for criminal prosecution. Brad's attorney had included a media strategy. Within 24 hours of filing, the story was everywhere. Richmond woman accused of defrauding elderly parents. Following defense career, ran in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. The local NBC affiliate picked it up for their evening broadcast. By Friday morning, it was trending on social media with the hashtag #elderabuse. My photo, pulled from my LinkedIn profile, appeared next to headlines that turned my life inside out. The narrative was simple and devastating. Government employee uses insider knowledge to steal from vulnerable family members. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Reporters, neighbors, former colleagues who'd seen the news and wanted to know if it was true. Each call felt like another small death. I stopped answering after the 15th ring. Monday morning, I drove to work like nothing had changed, but my access badge wouldn't work. The security guard at the front desk looked embarrassed when he told me I needed to speak with human resources. Erin, my supervisor Sarah Martinez, said, "We need to discuss your situation." She was holding a printed copy of the news article, my mugshot not really a mugshot. Just my employee ID photo stared back at me from the headline. "I'm being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of your legal proceedings," she said. "Given the nature of your work with sensitive databases, the company can't risk any appearance of impropriety. Sarah, you know me. You know I would never. It's not about what I know. It's about what our clients and oversight committees might think. I'm sorry." I cleaned out my desk in 20 minutes. 15 years of building security systems that protected vulnerable people, reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a temporary access badge that would expire at midnight. The parking lot felt like a movie set after the cameras stopped rolling. Empty. Unreal. Like nothing that had just happened could possibly be true, but it was true. And it was just the beginning. The phone stopped ringing after the first week, not because the story died, but because people stopped wanting to hear my side. Former colleagues avoided me at the grocery store. Neighbors who'd waved for years suddenly found their lawns fascinating whenever I walked by. The invitations stopped coming. Birthday parties, work happy hours. The book club I'd belonged to for 3 years sent a polite email explaining they'd decided to go in a different direction. I became a ghost in my own story. Present but not seen. Existing but not acknowledged. My parents' lawyer scheduled a deposition for the following month. Brad's team was confident they'd have a settlement before Christmas. The media had moved on to other scandals, but the internet is forever. My name was now permanently linked to words like fraud and elder abuse. Late at night, I'd sit in my quiet house and wonder if this was how it felt to be erased completely, not just from family dinners or holiday photos, but from the entire world. But erasure, I was learning, creates its own kind of clarity. When you have nothing left to lose, you can finally see what was always there. And what I saw in the silence of my empty life was a pattern of theft that went far beyond forged signatures and stolen property. The doubt started small, like a hairline crack in glass, that spreads until the whole window shatters. Maybe I had signed those documents. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe the stress of work, the isolation, the years of being dismissed had finally broken something in my brain, and I was creating conspiracies where none existed. I'd sit at my kitchen table at 3 a.m. staring at the forged signatures under my magnifying glass, wondering if I was losing my mind. The ink looked wrong, the pressure was off, the angle of the letters didn't match my natural handwriting. But what if I was seeing things that weren't there? What if my need to be right was stronger than my ability to see the truth? The memories came in fragments, uninvited. Christmas 1995. I was 10. Brad was 14. We were supposed to go to the movies as a family. But when I came downstairs with my coat, they were already backing out of the driveway. My mother saw me through the window and mouthed sorry before they drove away. I spent the afternoon watching Home Alone by myself, eating leftover pie. Brad's graduation party, 2003. I'd driven down from college to celebrate with him, brought a card with $50 inside money I'd earned working at the campus bookstore. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. I found my mother in the kitchen and asked where I should put my gift. "Oh, honey," she said, "we weren't sure you were coming. There's not really a designated spot for presents." I left the card on the counter and stayed for exactly 1 hour standing in corners, watching my brother hold court with his friends, while my parents beamed with pride. When I said goodbye, no one noticed me leave. My father's 60th birthday, 2011. I'd booked a flight from Richmond to Atlanta where my aunt was hosting a surprise party. I texted Brad the week before to coordinate arrival times. "Dad's birthday is next month," he replied. "Party's the 15th, not the 8th. I'd gotten the date wrong. Or had I? I checked my calendar, my email, my phone. Everything said the 8th. But when I called my aunt, she confirmed the party was the 15th. "I could have sworn I told you the right date," she said. "Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd been misunderstanding things for years." Dr. Rachel Thompson, my therapist from 2016 to 2018, had been kind but direct. "You overanalyze everything, Erin. Not every social interaction is a chess game. Sometimes people are just busy. Sometimes plans change. Sometimes you're not being deliberately excluded. You're just reading too much into normal family dynamics." She'd been right about the overanalyzing. I could turn a casual comment into a 3-hour spiral of self-doubt. I could find patterns in random events, connections that existed only in my need to make sense of feeling left out. But what if this time was different? What if the patterns were real? I pulled out my laptop and started a spreadsheet. Dates, events, inconsistencies. The mortgage statement that arrived without warning. The trust documents I'd supposedly signed while 120 miles away. The lawsuit that painted me as a master manipulator when I'd spent most of my life being invisible. The numbers didn't lie. Dates were facts. Financial records were evidence. And when I looked at the data objectively removed from emotion and family history, and my own tendency to doubt myself, a picture emerged that had nothing to do with my imagination. Someone had been planning this for months, maybe years. The forged signatures weren't a desperate last-minute grab for money. They were part of a systematic campaign to remove me from my own family's story. The question wasn't whether I was losing my mind. The question was why someone wanted me to think I was. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. For the first time in months, my breathing felt steady. My thoughts felt clear. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overanalyzing. I wasn't seeing patterns that didn't exist. I was seeing exactly what someone had hoped I'd be too broken to notice. And that realization changed everything. The clarity that came with accepting I wasn't crazy opened doors I didn't know existed. I started with what I knew: database analysis, pattern recognition, following digital breadcrumbs until they led somewhere that made sense. But instead of protecting veteran records, I was hunting for evidence that someone had been stealing them. My home office became a war room. 3 monitors, 2 laptops, and every piece of documentation I could legally access, spread across 2 folding tables. I worked methodically the way I'd been trained, one thread at a time, building a web of connections that would either prove my suspicions or put them to rest permanently. The trust documents came first. I'd already identified the forged signatures, but now I looked deeper. The notary stamps, the witness signatures, the legal language itself. Everything pointed to a coordinated effort to remove me from my family's financial structure while making it look legitimate. But that was just the surface. Coleman Family Services' Brad and Eva's therapy practice claimed to serve 347 veterans through their trauma counseling programs. Their website featured testimonials from grateful clients, photos of group therapy sessions, and detailed descriptions of their innovative treatment approaches. I cross-referenced their client list with the VA database I'd helped secure for 15 years. The first red flag was Michael Rodriguez, a Marine veteran from Norfolk, who'd supposedly been receiving therapy for PTSD since 2019. According to Coleman Family Services, he was a success story, a wounded warrior who'd found healing through their programs. According to the VA database, Michael Rodriguez had died in 2017. But someone was still filing benefit claims in his name. Someone was still applying for housing assistance, medical coverage, and educational grants. Someone was collecting payments on behalf of a dead man. I found 17 more within an hour. Dead veterans whose identities were being used to generate income streams that flowed directly into accounts controlled by Brad and Eva's business network. The living veterans on their client list were even more troubling. I found James Patterson, a Navy veteran who'd lost his leg in Iraq. Coleman Family Services listed him as an active client, receiving intensive therapy 3 times a week. But James Patterson lived in Seattle. He'd never been to Virginia. He'd never heard of Coleman Family Services. Yet someone was filing claims in his name for benefits he'd never requested. Someone was applying for grants he'd never seen. Someone was building a financial profile using his military service record, while he worked construction 12 hours a day, completely unaware his identity was being stolen. The pattern became clear. Coleman Family Services was a front. They provided just enough legitimate therapy to maintain their licenses and fool oversight agencies, but their real business was identity theft on an industrial scale, and my name was all over it. According to the financial records I'd pieced together, Erin Callahan had been instrumental in identifying vulnerable veterans for their client base. My supposed access to VA databases had provided the raw material for their fraud network. My defense contractor credentials had given them credibility with oversight agencies. They'd been using my professional reputation to legitimize their crimes for over 3 years. Shell companies routed the stolen funds through a network that would have impressed organized crime investigators. Coleman Family Services fed money to Richmond Veteran Support, which transferred funds to Northern Virginia Community Outreach, which deposited checks into accounts controlled by 7 different LLCs, all connected to Brad's business empire. The money moved in circles, getting cleaned at each transfer point until it emerged as legitimate income from legitimate sources. Classic money laundering, sophisticated enough to fool casual audits, but sloppy enough to leave digital fingerprints if you knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. One transaction made my blood freeze. A payment of $47,000 routed through Cayman Strategic Holdings, a financial services company I'd flagged 18 months earlier during a routine security audit. It was a known laundering hub for international criminal networks, the kind of outfit that didn't ask questions about where money came from as long as the fees were paid. My former colleagues at Meridian Defense Solutions had been tracking Cayman Strategic Holdings for 2 years, building a case for federal prosecution. The company was connected to arms dealers, human traffickers, and terrorist financing networks. And now it was connected to my brother's therapy practice. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just family dysfunction or financial greed. This was organized crime operating under the cover of helping veterans using my professional credentials to steal from the very people I'd spent my career protecting. The scope of it was staggering. Hundreds of stolen identities, millions of dollars in fraudulent claims, a network of shell companies designed to obscure the money trail, and at the center of it all, my family people who dismissed my work as background tech stuff, while using my reputation to commit federal crimes. I sat in my dark office at 4 a.m., staring at the evidence spread across my screens. Financial records, forged documents, stolen identities, money trails that led from dead veterans to offshore accounts. The lawsuit against me wasn't just about stealing my inheritance. It was about discrediting me before I could expose what they'd been doing. If I was painted as a disturbed, vengeful daughter who'd defrauded her own family, who would believe me when I accused them of running a criminal enterprise? But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was the same quiet, compliant person who'd let them define her worth for 37 years. They'd forgotten that I was very, very good at my job. And now I was going to use every skill I'd learned protecting veterans to destroy the people who'd been preying on them. The evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail was airtight. The digital footprints were impossible to deny. All I needed now was someone with the authority to act on it. Someone who understood that this wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a federal crime. Building a federal case against your own family isn't something you do alone. I started with people I trusted. People who understood the weight of evidence, the importance of documentation, and the difference between personal revenge and public justice. Detective Angela Martinez had retired from the VA's Office of Inspector General 6 months earlier after 23 years investigating benefit fraud. We'd worked together on 3 major cases, and she'd always been impressed by my ability to trace digital fingerprints through complex financial networks. I called her on a Sunday morning. "Erin," she said, "I heard about your situation. I'm sorry." "Angela, I need to show you something, but not over the phone." We met at a coffee shop in Chesterfield, far enough from downtown Richmond that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I brought a laptop and a folder of printed documents. She brought 30 years of experience recognizing organized fraud. It took her 15 minutes to see what I'd seen. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "Jesus Christ," she said quietly. "How many identities? At least 200, maybe more. And they've been using your credentials to legitimize it for 3 years, maybe longer." Angela closed the laptop and sat back in her chair. "This isn't a family dispute, Erin. This is a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes." "I know, but I need help building the case. I need people who understand how these networks operate." She nodded slowly. "I know someone." David Park had spent 12 years as a cybersecurity contractor before starting his own digital forensics company. He specialized in tracking financial crimes through online networks, the kind of work that required both technical expertise and investigative intuition. Angela vouched for me and David agreed to meet the following Tuesday. His office in downtown Richmond was sparse, but efficient, the kind of place where serious work got done without fanfare. I laid out the evidence, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the digital trails that connected Coleman Family Services to international money laundering networks. "This is sophisticated," David said, scrolling through my documentation. "Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Can you trace the IP addresses, the digital signatures on the forged documents?" "Already am," he said, fingers flying across his keyboard. "Look at this." He pulled up a network map showing the digital connections between different components of the fraud. IP addresses, server locations, digital certificates, the electronic fingerprints that modern criminals leave behind without realizing it. "Your brother's laptop," David said, pointing to a cluster of red dots on his screen. "Same IP address used to access victim accounts, file fraudulent claims, and create shell company documentation. He didn't even try to hide it." The third person I needed was Rebecca Williams, a paralegal who'd helped expose a similar veteran fraud case in North Carolina. She understood the legal processes, the federal agencies involved, and the chain of evidence required to make charges stick. "The key," Rebecca explained over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Midlothian, "is getting federal authorities involved before your family's lawsuit goes to trial. If this becomes public as a civil dispute, it muddles the criminal case." "What do you mean?" Defense attorneys love to claim that criminal charges are just revenge from a civil lawsuit. They'll argue that you're fabricating evidence to get back at your family. But if federal investigators are already working the case when the lawsuit is filed, that narrative falls apart. She was right. The timing mattered. The sequence of events would determine whether I was seen as a whistleblower or a vengeful daughter. "I have a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division," Rebecca said. "Someone who specializes in veteran fraud cases. If we can get the evidence to her before your court date, she can open a preliminary investigation under whistleblower protection." 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at the FBI field office in Richmond, across from Special Agent Jennifer Scott, and a team of federal investigators. The evidence filled 4 bankers' boxes and 2 external hard drives. Ms. Callahan, Agent Scott said, "We need to be clear about what you're alleging. This isn't just fraud. This is organized crime using veteran identity theft to fund international money laundering. I understand. And you're prepared to testify against your family members." I looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to protecting the vulnerable from predators. People who understood that justice wasn't about personal satisfaction. It was about stopping machines designed to hurt innocent people. "I'm not trying to win a courtroom," I said. "I'm trying to stop a machine." Agent Scott nodded. "Then we're going to help you do exactly that." The federal investigation began that day, 3 weeks before my family's lawsuit was scheduled for trial. They had no idea what was coming. I invited my parents to my house 2 days before the hearing. Not because I expected reconciliation, but because I needed to understand when they'd decided I didn't matter. They arrived at 3 p.m. on a gray Sunday afternoon, looking smaller than I remembered. My mother wore the navy blue dress she saved for church and funerals. My father's hands shook slightly as he walked up my front steps, age or nerves or the weight of what was coming. I made coffee, set out cookies I'd bought but wouldn't eat, arranged the living room like we were having a normal family visit instead of what felt like a wake. "This is a nice house," my mother said, settling onto my couch. "You've done well for yourself." The small talk felt like broken glass in my mouth. We discussed the weather, my father's arthritis, my mother's new book club, as if we weren't sitting in the ruins of 37 years of family history. Finally, I asked the question I'd driven myself half crazy trying to answer. "When did you decide I didn't count?" My mother's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "Erin, what kind of question is that? Of course you count. You're our daughter." But not enough to notice when my signature was forged on legal documents. Not enough to ask me before removing me from the family trust. Not enough to believe me when I said I never signed those papers. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Erin, we didn't know what to believe. Brad showed us the paperwork. Everything looked legitimate. Did it, or did you just trust him more than you trusted me?" The silence stretched between us like a canyon. My mother looked at her hands. My father stared at the coffee table. "You were always distant," he said finally. "Even as a child. You kept to yourself. You didn't share things with us. Brad was different. He called every week. He visited. He included us in his life. He included you in his crimes. That's not fair," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "What's not fair is that you believed I was capable of stealing from you. What's not fair is that you never asked for my side of the story. What's not fair is that you let him erase me from our family, because it was easier than admitting you'd raised a son who became a criminal." I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a manila envelope, set it on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" my father asked. "Evidence. Everything Brad and Eva have been doing for the past 3 years. The stolen veteran identities, the shell companies, the money laundering, the federal crimes they've been committing while you celebrated their success." My mother reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "Don't open it now. Take it with you. Read it when you're ready to understand what you've been defending." They sat in stunned silence. My father's hands had stopped shaking. My mother's eyes were fixed on the envelope like it might explode. "I spent my whole life trying to earn your respect," I said. "Trying to prove I was worth your attention. But I was never the problem. I was just the daughter who inconveniently existed when you'd already decided which child mattered." I walked them to the door. My mother hugged me tentatively like she was afraid I might break. My father squeezed my shoulder. "Erin," he said, "we never meant—" "I know," I said. "You never meant to hurt me. You just never meant to see me either." I handed my mother the envelope. "I'm not the one who walked away. I was erased." I closed the door and watched through the window as they drove away. For the first time in months, I felt completely calm. Tomorrow the truth would come out, but tonight I was finally free. The courtroom felt different on the morning of the hearing, heavier, like the air itself knew something was about to break. I arrived early and took my seat in the back row, the same spot I'd occupied for every preliminary hearing. My family sat in the front, confident and composed. Brad wore his best suit, the charcoal gray one he saved for important business meetings. Eva had chosen a conservative blue dress that made her look trustworthy, professional. My parents sat between them, a united front against their wayward daughter. Marcus Webb, their lawyer, shuffled through his papers with the satisfied efficiency of a man who'd never lost a case this straightforward. Elder abuse, financial fraud, a disturbed daughter who'd finally revealed her true nature. The gallery was fuller than usual. Word had spread about the defense contractor fraud case, and local reporters had come to watch a family destroy itself in public. Judge Harrison entered at exactly 9 a.m. "Please be seated. We're here for Coleman v. Callahan civil action for financial elder abuse and fraud." Webb stood with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of a daughter who exploited her elderly parents' trust and her professional access to government databases to steal their life savings. The evidence is overwhelming." For the next hour, he painted me as a master manipulator, a cold, calculating woman who'd used her defense contractor credentials to intimidate vulnerable, elderly people. Someone who'd forged documents, manipulated financial records, and systematically isolated her parents from their assets. Ms. Callahan has spent 15 years learning how to access sensitive government information. Webb said, his voice rising with righteous indignation. She used those skills not to serve her country, but to prey on the people who raised her. My parents nodded along. Brad looked appropriately sorrowful, the grieving son forced to take legal action against his own sister. "The defendant has shown no remorse," Webb continued. "No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. She sits in this courtroom silent and defiant, while her elderly parents struggle to rebuild their lives after her betrayal." He gestured toward me with theatrical disgust. "Your Honor, this woman represents everything wrong with our society. She was given trust, given access, given opportunity, and she used it all to destroy her own family." A few reporters scribbled notes. My parents looked appropriately devastated. Brad's performance as the reluctant prosecutor was flawless. When Webb finished, Judge Harrison turned to me. "Ms. Callahan, do you wish to make an opening statement?" I stood slowly. "No, Your Honor, but I do have evidence to submit." Webb's confidence faltered slightly. "Your Honor, the discovery period has closed. Any new evidence should have been submitted." "This isn't new evidence," I said calmly. "This is federal evidence." I walked to the judge's bench and placed the sealed folder on his desk. The same folder I'd prepared with Agent Scott's team, the one that contained everything. Judge Harrison opened it and began reading. His expression didn't change immediately. Judges are trained to maintain composure, but I saw the moment when he reached page 4, the comprehensive list of stolen veteran identities, the financial trails leading to offshore accounts, the digital fingerprints linking everything to Coleman Family Services. He read for 3 minutes in absolute silence. The courtroom watched, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Webb cleared his throat. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," Judge Harrison said, not looking up from the documents. He reached page 7, the IP address logs showing that fraudulent benefit claims had been filed from Brad's home computer, the digital signatures on forged documents that matched equipment registered to Coleman Family Services. Page 9 made him pause completely. The connection to Cayman Strategic Holdings, the international money laundering network, the possible compromise of military-sensitive data. When he finished reading, Judge Harrison set the folder down and looked at me. "Ms. Callahan, I need you to confirm something for the record. Are you alleging that the plaintiffs in this case have been engaged in federal crimes?" "I'm not alleging anything, Your Honor. I'm presenting evidence of ongoing federal crimes that have been under investigation for 3 weeks." The courtroom erupted. Brad shot to his feet. "That's impossible. She's lying." "Mr. Coleman," Judge Harrison said sharply, "sit down." Webb was frantically shuffling papers. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt to—" "Mr. Webb," the judge interrupted, "I suggest you review what's in this folder before you finish that sentence." I remained standing, perfectly calm. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, not the moment of victory, but the moment of truth. "Bailiff Turk." Judge Harrison said, "Secure the courtroom doors. No one leaves until this is resolved." The bailiff moved quickly. The heavy wooden doors closed with finality. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "contact the U.S. Marshals. Tell them we need federal agents here immediately." Eva grabbed Brad's arm. My parents looked confused, frightened. Webb was reading over the judge's shoulder, his face growing paler with each page. "Your Honor," Webb said weakly, "my clients were not aware of any federal investigation." Mr. Webb, I strongly advise you to stop talking. The marshals arrived within minutes. 3 agents in dark suits, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Agent Scott entered last, scanning the courtroom before making eye contact with me. Mr. Coleman, Miss Coleman, Judge Harrison said, "You're being detained for federal questioning regarding crimes outlined in this evidence. You have the right to remain silent." Brad started to protest, but Eva pulled him back down. She was smarter than him. She could see that the game was over. The marshals approached quietly. Brad's hands were shaking as they guided him toward the door. Eva walked with dignity, but her face was the color of ash. My parents sat in stunned silence, watching their son being led away in handcuffs. The reporters were scribbling furiously. The gallery buzzed with whispers and confusion. Judge Harrison addressed the remaining people in the courtroom. The civil action is suspended pending federal investigation. All parties are advised that this matter is now under federal jurisdiction. He looked at me one final time. "Ms. Callahan, you're free to go." I gathered my things slowly, methodically. My parents were still sitting in their seats staring at nothing. Webb was packing his briefcase like a man in a trance. As I walked toward the door, I heard someone whisper, "Did she plan this whole thing?" I didn't turn around. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't about revenge. This was about refusing to disappear. I stepped out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunlight, breathing freely for the first time in months. Behind me, the wreckage of my family's crimes was finally coming to light. But ahead of me, for the first time in my life, the path was clear. The story exploded within hours. Defense contractor exposes family's veteran fraud ring ran across every major news outlet by evening. My photo, still that same LinkedIn headshot, appeared next to headlines that transformed me from criminal to whistleblower overnight. The narrative had flipped completely. The quiet daughter who'd been painted as a manipulative thief was now the federal witness who'd exposed a multimillion-dollar fraud operation targeting disabled veterans. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the next morning. CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, NBC's Today Show. Everyone wanted the exclusive interview with the woman who'd brought down her own family to protect strangers. I didn't answer any of them. The Richmond Times-Dispatch ran a front-page profile. Local woman's courage exposes veteran identity theft ring. The article included quotes from Agent Scott about the scope of the investigation, background on my defense contractor career, and speculation about how long the fraud had been operating. But no quotes from me, because I wasn't talking. The online response was split down the middle. Half the comments called me a hero, a patriot, someone who'd put justice above family loyalty to protect the veterans who'd served our country. The other half called me a vindictive daughter who'd destroyed her own family over money. A cold-hearted woman who'd used her government connections to frame innocent people. Someone who'd chosen strangers over the people who'd raised her. Both sides were wrong. This had never been about heroism or revenge. It had been about refusing to disappear. The federal investigation moved quickly once the evidence was in the open. Agent Scott held a press conference 3 days after the courthouse arrests, confirming that the FBI was investigating a sophisticated identity theft operation targeting vulnerable veterans. She was careful with her words. "We believe this network may have affected hundreds of veterans across multiple states. The investigation is ongoing, but we want to assure the public that we're working to identify all victims and hold all perpetrators accountable." Brad and Eva were released on federal bail, but couldn't leave the state. Their therapy practice was shut down pending investigation. Their assets were frozen. The house they'd stolen from my parents was now evidence in a federal case. My parents were not charged. Due to their age and documented cognitive decline, Agent Scott explained to me privately, we don't believe they had criminal intent. They appear to have been manipulated by family members who exploited their trust. I wasn't sure I agreed with that assessment. My parents had chosen to believe Brad's lies over my truth. They'd signed legal documents without reading them. They'd participated in my erasure because it was easier than admitting they'd raised a criminal. But I didn't argue. They were old, they were confused, and they were paying a price worse than prison, watching their golden child revealed as the predator he'd always been. The media attention was relentless for 2 weeks. Reporters camped outside my house. Neighbors gave interviews about the quiet woman who kept to herself. Former colleagues at Meridian Defense Solutions praised my integrity and attention to detail, but I remained silent. Producer calls came daily. Book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements at conferences about whistleblowing and family trauma. Everyone wanted to hear my story in my own words. I declined everything. Because this wasn't about being heard. It had never been about being heard. 3 weeks after the courthouse arrests, I sat on my back porch at sunrise drinking coffee and watching the world wake up. The reporters had moved on to other stories. The phone had stopped ringing. The neighbors had stopped staring when I checked my mailbox. The silence felt different now, not empty but full. Not lonely but peaceful. I'd spent 37 years trying to earn my family's respect. Trying to prove I was worth their attention. Trying to find my voice in conversations that had no space for me. But I'd been thinking about it all wrong. I didn't need to be heard. I needed to be seen. And sometimes silence is the only way to make that happen. The federal case would take months to resolve. Brad and Eva would likely face decades in prison. The stolen money would be returned to the VA for legitimate veteran services. The shell companies would be dissolved. The international connections would be severed. Justice, methodical and thorough, would grind forward without my voice guiding it. My parents had moved into a senior living facility in Norfolk closer to my aunt. They'd sent a letter apologizing for not understanding the situation. They hoped we could work toward healing as a family. I'd read the letter twice, then filed it away with the other legal documents. Maybe someday I'd be ready for that conversation. Maybe someday I'd want to rebuild something from the ruins of what we'd been. But not yet. Not while the silence was still teaching me who I was when no one else was defining me. The sun cleared the trees behind my house, warming the air and burning off the morning dew. Another day. Another chance to exist quietly in my own story. I'd destroyed my family to save strangers. I'd chosen justice over loyalty. I'd refused to disappear. Some people called that heroic. Others called it heartless. I called it Tuesday morning, and I was finally okay with that. 6 months after the courthouse arrests, I started getting calls from women I'd never met. The first was Sarah Mitchell, a Navy veteran from Norfolk, whose brother had been filing disability claims in her name for 3 years. She'd discovered the fraud the same way I had through a mortgage statement for a house she didn't own. "I saw your story on the news," she said. "I know you're not giving interviews, but I didn't know who else to call. My family's lawyer says I can't prove my brother forged my signature. Says family disputes are civil matters, not criminal ones." I listened to her story. The familiar pattern of erasure, the gaslighting, the systematic theft of identity and dignity. By the time she finished, I knew what I had to do. The foundation started small. Second Signal, named for the backup communication system we'd used in my defense contractor days when the primary network failed. A quiet nonprofit that helped women veterans fight back against family members who'd stolen their identities. I funded it myself initially, using the settlement money from my parents' estate. The federal investigation had revealed that my inheritance had been stolen, not legitimately transferred, so the courts restored my legal ownership. My parents' house, the trust funds, everything Brad had tried to take, it all came back to me. I could have kept it. Could have seen it as compensation for 37 years of being erased. But money had never been the point. Second Signal operated out of a small office in downtown Richmond. 3 staff members, a paralegal who understood family fraud cases, a cybersecurity expert who could trace digital evidence, and a social worker who specialized in trauma recovery. We didn't advertise. We didn't seek publicity. We just helped quietly and effectively, one case at a time. The women who found us were all variations of the same story. Daughters who'd been dismissed as difficult or paranoid. Sisters who'd been excluded from family financial decisions. Wives who'd discovered their husbands had been stealing their military benefits for years. All of them had been told they were imagining things. All of them had been gaslit into doubting their own memories, their own worth, their own right to exist in their family's stories. We helped them document the fraud, trace the money, build federal cases, restore their stolen identities, fight back against the people who'd tried to erase them. Most importantly, we helped them understand that silence wasn't the same as invisibility. That being quiet didn't mean being powerless. That sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is listen, observe, and remember. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in November, addressed to me personally at the foundation office. "Dear Miss Callahan," it began. "You don't know me, but you saved my life." The woman's name was Jennifer Walsh, a Marine veteran from Virginia Beach. Her ex-husband had been using her military credentials to apply for grants and benefits, while she worked 3 jobs to support their children. She'd tried to report him to the VA, but he'd convinced investigators that she was mentally unstable, seeking revenge after a bitter divorce. "I was ready to give up," she wrote. "I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was just a bitter ex-wife making up stories for attention." Second Signal had helped her gather evidence, build a case, and prove that her ex-husband had been stealing from her for 5 years. He was now facing federal charges. Her benefits had been restored. Her children were safe. But more than that, the letter continued. "You helped me understand that I wasn't disappearing. I was just learning to be quiet in a different way, learning to be powerful without being loud." She ended with a line that made me sit in my office chair for 10 minutes, just breathing. "We thought no one would help us. Then you did." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer next to the ID badge from my old job at Meridian Defense Solutions. 2 pieces of paper that represented the same truth. Sometimes the most important work happens in silence. That weekend, I drove to Virginia Beach, not to meet Jennifer Walsh. She didn't know I was coming, and I didn't plan to introduce myself. I just wanted to stand by the water and think about the distance between who I'd been and who I'd become. The beach was empty at dawn. The waves rolled in with quiet persistence, reshaping the shore, 1 grain of sand at a time. The kind of change that's invisible, moment to moment, but profound over time. I stood there as the sun rose, watching the water smooth away yesterday's footprints and prepare the sand for new ones. Thinking about the women who'd found their voices by learning to use their silence strategically. The veterans who'd reclaimed their identities by refusing to disappear. The families who'd discovered that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or safety. Some battles aren't loud. Some victories don't cheer. Some truths emerge, not through shouting, but through the steady accumulation of evidence, the patient building of cases, the quiet refusal to be erased. I'd spent most of my life trying to be heard in conversations that had no space for me. But I'd learned something more valuable: how to be seen in the silence between words. How to be powerful without being loud. How to change the world one small act of witness at a time. The waves kept rolling in. The sun kept rising. The beach kept accepting whatever the ocean brought to shore. And I kept standing there, finally comfortable in my own quiet strength. Silence, when earned, can be the loudest truth of all.